Hello and welcome to Copenhagen, the green Silicon Valley. We have a panel full of investors with us, all focusing upon impact or green tech in one way or the other. And for those of you who've been with us throughout the day, you've laid an ear to some very abstract and ideological discussions. But for the next an hour or so, we will be much more specific and concrete and come with actual recommendations. So a bit different focus than what you've seen throughout the day. We'll start with a short round of introductions. I think I'll allow up to 2 minutes, per person. But it does come with a criteria. So of course, who are you, your organization, and then also share with us the total amount that you've invested in impact companies so far, so we kind of have an understanding. Anders, you are a guest from abroad. Let's start with you.
Thank you very much, Stina. It's really glad to be here. It's fantastic to come to a face-to-face conference. I have to say that first of all, and thank you very much for inviting us. My name is Anders. I'm a partner with Antler, and Antler is a Nordic first early stage VC firm and a company builder. We were formed over in Asia, and we're now in 14 places across the world where we build companies and invest in those companies as well. Here in the Nordics over the past 2 years, we invested in about 65 companies, and many, even most of them, have a clear impact angle, and many also have a green tech/clean tech angle. So in terms of capital deployed, I think we invested about $10 million into this field that we talked about. So it's a starting point, and we're at a very early stage. So given that, I think it's a good start, but a long way to go. So Antler, we start with entrepreneurs. We think that the best companies are built by the best people, but oftentimes they don't find each other by themselves. So we recruit excellent people, company builders, entrepreneurs, operators, technologists, researchers from various walks of life and various fields of study. And we bring them together in what we call cohorts. And then over the course of 6 months, we help them form really strong teams. And together with them, we lay the foundation for really strong teams to thrive and to grow and reach their full potential. So that's what Antler does. And the model is now growing, gaining attention globally as well. So in Copenhagen, we're launching this year, 2021, which is, I think, super exciting. That's also why I'm here today. And we're looking to start our first Copenhagen cohort in the fall, end of August 2021, and looking to have between 30 and 40 fantastic entrepreneurs, and together with them build the companies of tomorrow, focused on green tech, climate tech. And in our back, we have the Danish growth fund, Vex Fund, as an anchor investor. So really excited to be here and look forward to today's conversation about these matters and see how we can work together to make the world a better place through investing in the right firms.
Lovely. Thank you so much. Mikkel, will you continue? Local
Yes.
perspective, an angel.
Yeah. So I'm from Danban. We are an investor hub of about 250 people, all business angels from all around Denmark. The main focus, or the main population of the Danban memberships are in Copenhagen. I'm myself from Jutland, and we invest in these pre-seed early investors, early companies, and in the green sector that we are here for today, we are not very far. So we need, I think, a lot of learning, a lot of incentives to go into this segment as a group. And I think for a lot of these self-made millionaires that a lot of us are, we wish to see businesses that are making profit relative early. And in that way, we are relative conservative as a group. And therefore, we need these incentives that hopefully come from discussions like the discussions we have here today.
Exactly. And I understand that obviously you don't need to keep count on every Danban investor and how large, but maybe just for yourself, like how much have you invested so far and in how many? And are any of those green or impact?
Yeah, so because we usually wish to have some kind of revenue in the companies we are investing, and I think I can say that for most of the investors in Danban. The price tag we can come in with and the share we can have is relative small if it's in an impact company, because the amount that we usually invest is between 100,000 crowns and 2 million, and in that range we don't actually have the money to go into impact companies with heavy technology.
Yeah,
so a lot of the impact or green technologies we are helping is companies that are making some kind of green infrastructure. Tech companies that are doing that. But as an earlier speaker said today, we need to have not only infrastructure, we need to have these changes. And I think we are in a bit of a hard spot here as Danban, because the range of money we are ready to invest and what we wish from the company with revenue don't mix up very good. So in that way, we syndicate, but the revenue, the companies that come into Danban are usually, there are not many of these green impact companies.
No, and that's completely fair. The reason I'm asking is actually because I know that amongst the audience, both physically here and also online, is startups who's currently in fundraising mode. So I just wanted to get the ticket size and a bit of understanding of the four of you being investors. Where do you stand? But just for your own, you as one private investor, how much do you typically invest, and in how many startups have you invested so far?
We started in the start of 2020, and we have made 5 investments. In a range from a few 100,000 up to, it's becoming complicated because we usually work in tranches. Should we go into that as well? Or?
I think we'll just stick to the headlines.
Okay. But, so we usually make a smaller investment and then have some follow-up investments before rounds. So it would be make these milestones, and then we'll get you some extra cash and agree on that, and then we have a roadmap for that.
But that initial investment, a few 100,000-ish.
It could be as low as a few 100,000,
That's super. What is the maximum investment amount that you put into one company?
I think I have too few companies to say that aloud.
That's fair. Please, we're moving on to you, Anne-Louise, then.
Yeah, so I wear a lot of hats, actually. One of them is on the board of Vex Fund, so I know a few people around here quite well. And I co-founded, because I have a really good partner in this, SDG Invest, which is a global equity fund. But it's enormous companies we invest in. What we did there, because it's sort of overall cap, is impact and responsible investment. So what we did there was we developed a scorecard that we're using to select the most sustainable companies in the world. We use the same scorecard and the same methodology. In fact, in many ways, the same group of investors that founded SDG Invest to make venture investments. So, in fact, I believe we still have an investment together, don't we? Yeah, cool. You're still there? Okay. So for the Global Equity Fund, we have about 1,500 investors. We're listed on NASDAQ, and the amount is, I think, today was 610 million kroner. For the venture side, it's a difficult, some of the questions you were asked were difficult because often you go together in a group and you make the investment together. So I work with a group called Impact Collective, where we're about 20, maybe we're not as many as that, but 12 investors on a continuous basis that assess early startups together. We also have another group that does venture investments, and we sort of form the way we do the investments, but it's always based on impact and sustainable investment. And to answer some of your question, the ticket size, I think the maximum we did as a group, but that was, so that was not just investors that I work with, was $10 million. And I think the minimum I've done is like 50,000 kroner.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's I didn't do the $10 million on my own, but it is.
The syndicate
so the
amounted in
syndicate-
total to definitely.
Yeah, and I also sit on the Fund for Entrepreneurskab, which is the fund for entrepreneurs in Denmark. And ticket size there is 25,000 to 50, but often you meet them again along the way.
Yeah.
So you assess these companies here, and then you drink coffee with them later, and then you follow them. And obviously, you'd like to be on the journey with the companies that you are involved with.
Perfect. Thank you for this. And last but not least, Søren Stig.
Thank you. Yeah. My name is Søren Stig. I guess I'm a little bit an oddball, also wearing many.
Also?
That was me, not referring to you. Referring to my Danban member here. But wearing multiple different hats, both as an angel investor myself, but also actively involved in starting companies. So as a founder, latest Home.Earth, where we're trying to rethink how we do property development for those that don't have access. And then I'm also very heavily involved in Catapult, which is an organization similar to Antler that runs accelerators, but also multiple funds, and where we over the last 5 years have invested in 120 what we call impact first companies. So founders and startups that have a clear intention about creating impact with what they do and using entrepreneurship, technology, and capital to change the system. And then finally, quite involved in trying to build capacity in the investor community in the Nordics, meaning we have a sense that much more capital needs to flow in a direction of impact-focused founders. And it's not that the capital isn't there, it's more perhaps a challenge helping investors make that first initial step from classical investment to investing with impact in mind. So we run courses, we bring people together for dinners, we try and build capacity in the communities that we're part of, and see that as an opportunity for the Nordics, and in Denmark in particular also, to kind of step up and really start showing some leadership in this space. So I guess that's where we come from. Ticket sizes vary between, I would say, $200,000 and then up to about a million. And in my own case, it's almost now entirely through syndication. So it's very rarely that I do a direct investment myself. So.
And the syndicates amount to?
The syndicate, they differ depending on quite frankly the technology. So sometimes it's the money that's the important part. But in most cases, it's actually a combination of bringing knowledge, access, funding, and so forth. So we believe that that's part of the value proposition. If you want.
Makes sense.
But we'll talk more about also where the gaps are, because there are funding gaps also from a startup point of view. Yeah.
Which is the overall theme for today, right? How do we create additional funding opportunities? But I think I would like to start in the other end and talk about pipeline. So what kind of pipeline do you see? Because I hear in the environments that actually, we'll start with green tech and then we'll expand to impact. What is your experience with pipeline? Because I hear that there's too few green tech startups who are truly serious and who has truly scalable potential. So even though as an investor you would like to invest in green tech, it's actually not out there. And I know that you're planning on, what did you say, 30 to 40 new startups or entrepreneurs coming up in August.
That's
and
right.
you have a pretty impressive lead gen, or reaching out to almost 1,000 candidates in advance. So maybe it would be interesting, what kind of like green technology and business models do you see?
Sure.
And
thanks.
then please, we'll move on to the rest.
Great question. And from our point of view, at the top of the funnel, at the earliest stage possible, where entrepreneurs are not yet formed into teams, we see really super strong interest in building the green companies of tomorrow, the impact tech companies of tomorrow. 2-3 years ago when we started Antler here in the Nordics, it wasn't the same picture. But when we see the cohorts coming in now, and we're talking to a few thousand people each year from the Nordics who are interested in building companies, by and large, the vast majority have an interest in building companies not just to become a unicorn founder per se, but actually to build an impact unicorn and to build a company that makes a difference and that puts an imprint into the future. And that's the key driver of companies. And that then distributes into different areas of green tech and clean tech. I would say the three strongest that we can see from our vantage point, number one would be energy. Energy is super strong. And just in the past 12 months, there's just been an explosion of inspiration, I would say, from some of the big energy companies that are rising through the ranks, including in Sweden, we see Northvolt being a massive success story so far. Yeah. And I think that leads to a compound interest of inspiration in the ecosystems. So we see energy companies both in Oslo and Stockholm, where we've operated, that are very interested in building on renewable energy in various forms. But not just that. We see the other big trend is food and agri-tech, which is really strong. I think everyone can relate because we all eat food, we all consume food, buy, some even produce. And there's so many things that can be done. And this accounts for such a big part of the footprint, the carbon footprint. So we see great interest from from the farm to the fork throughout, from agri-tech, using deep tech devices in various ways of improving the agriculture sector, from what they grow and how it's the farmings are operating, all the way into the food tech, how the restaurants operate, substitute foods. And I would say the third big area we see is finance, sustainable finance. And how can we as consumers of financial services, in the best possible way, move our capital in the way that makes sense. And this is a big trend among the various generations, but especially those 20, 30, 40-year-olds coming in now, having a good financial literacy and background, but how can I move my capital to make a difference? Yeah. So I'd say energy, agri, and food tech, as well as financial sustainability, is three really big sectors we see.
So big sectors. So what you're saying also, to sum up, is you don't see a pipeline problem, actually.
From our point of view, we don't see a pipeline problem at all. We see, if anything, I would say...
And sorry, I'm just going to stop you because time is running. And I guess for Denmark, since it's not your focus area at that stage, pipeline is small, or...?
So in Denmark, we have our startup includer, where our funnel, where we take all the companies into a system and have them being screened and have a pitch, and in that way, all the business angels are able to see these companies and pick out the ones they like and like to talk more with. Yeah. And then we establish syndicates with these companies. Yeah. That's our usual funnel. And in that funnel, of course, some of them are green tech or clean tech, but it's a minority of our funnel.
Makes sense.
But it's growing, I would say, just to build on that. Because, I mean, if we've seen a trend over the last 3 to 4 years, clearly the percentage of founders that have, purpose-driven and impact-focused, whether it's environment or food or something, that's growing. So there is kind of a next generation of founders for whom this is kind of at the center of what they're trying to achieve, where the notion of building a company then is kind of that's a means to an end. It's in an effort to try and change something or build a better future, and not just, for instance, an immediate exit, which puts challenges back on us as investors also. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. And Louise, do you have something to add?
Yeah, actually, I disagree a little bit. I see a huge pipeline problem. I think we focus very much on the food and ag, the ed tech, and the energy innovation, and we don't see the cases, but we know they're coming. So we think that at the stage where we would like to invest, the companies just aren't there. So we are expanding our look and saying, okay, the company doesn't have to solve one problem of the world, but it has a product that is somehow good for the world, organic or whatever, then we are looking into that as well, because otherwise we'd have a huge pipeline problem. And a lot of and I agree with Søren that it's improving. So when we started, it was much worse, but we need more. But it was the same with our global equity fund. When we started out, we really struggled to find companies that we could include in the fund. Yeah. And now, it's easier, but it's not. We still need to look a little bit deeper than the rest.
And what could we do to create a greater green impact pipeline? So earlier we've heard suggestions about clusters, public funding, grant schemes, accelerators being a few here as well, but also just converting existing investors to expand their area of interest into impact. But what else? Do we have any other specific examples? Otherwise, I have plenty of other questions, and it's going to be short answers, please.
Yeah. So as I told you or said earlier today, on an earlier...
I pinpointed Mikkel. Yeah. He didn't know. I was like, Mikkel, what can we do to make you invest in more green tech startups? He was sitting right there where you were sitting. So
I think what we need to do is do something about the talent mass. Yeah. Because I think we have the talent in Denmark, but I don't think they know they have the talent. So a lot of young people today believe they have to go into the public sector because that's what they're educated to do. And a lot of these people actually don't see it as a life choice. And I think we need to change the way of thinking about business for a greater number of young people today.
But then I can just, you want us to be concrete, and that's exactly what we want to do. We want to inspire all generations, diverse in age and gender and nationality, to build companies, to use their skills and experience to build the best companies possible. That's why we're started. That's why we operate here. We think that so many people have what it takes to build great companies. But the biggest problem is not for us, the pipeline gap sort of later stage, but that people don't make that step. Take the step into entrepreneurship. And to do that, you need the funding, you need the strong teams and product market ideas and fit. So that's what we want to do. So any person interested in thinking about should I do this or not, we are here to support. And feel free to reach out to Antler, and we can take it forward.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I just want to build on the last point, which was around kind of pipeline. And I think it's both fat and rich, at least from our vantage point. For every cohort that we take into the accelerator, we look at about between 1,600 and 1,800 companies, and we take in 10. And we take them through a 3-month acceleration process. But we look through a global lens. We don't look at nationality. And I think our notion is that the best ideas, the best founders, they can come from anywhere. It doesn't really matter what flag you have on your shoulder. So I think there's maybe also a challenge in terms of thinking about the pool that we're fishing in, also as investors. Maybe being a bit more bold, leaning into a founder that's in transition or that's starting something up somewhere else. So I think it's just to challenge our mindset a little bit and not just look at kind of a Danish pool or Swedish or...
This is, of course, easier being a private actor and being able to, decide for yourself about your own money. Have we any examples of countries, governments, public initiatives that actually expanded up across the borders? Do we know? Maybe we don't.
I think, being here in Denmark, I have to give good compliments to Denmark for bringing us as a foreign VC player to Denmark to be able to bring both founders here and also Danish companies to the world in the future. So I think this is a very excellent open-minded view as a public player to do so. And I think some other players we work with are more focused on their home domicile. So I do see that Denmark, at least, has that sort of open vision to do that.
Cool.
I think the money isn't really following kind of the notion of entrepreneurship today, at least as I see it. It's a lot of entrepreneurs, they're quite mobile, they move around, they have networks across the globe, whereas from an investor point of view, in particular the private investors, they tend to only focus on what they can drive to and from, right? So it needs to be within a 50-kilometer range, otherwise you're not serious. That being said, we are seeing inbound interest from Silicon Valley or London or other places, and I think that goes to the point that there is something cooking here. There is something here that's quite unique, also compared to what's taking place elsewhere, even though we're maybe in the early stages.
But definitely, right? I don't think that we've ever seen as much international capital, nor interest or attention. I mean, myself and the local investors that I know are being called up every week by a new international investor saying, who do you know, who should I talk to? So the interest is massive for sure. Since let's move from pipeline to funding and say, how do we expand the structures or systems of funding? We of course have business angels, we have some public funding schemes. Earlier there was a panel on crowdfunding, which is relatively small in Denmark still. And then, of course, later stage, and most often our startups go to abroad when they're looking for a Series A. What do you see of specific things that we, as a country, can do to apply additional funding resources to impact startups?
I think last summer I got a call from a very famous VC guy, super successful. And he said, no, I'm changing. I'm going into impact investments only. And I said, that's super good news, because when people like you go into impact investment, that will move, because they all do the same anyway. So the lemming effect will just go that way, and that will really influence things. And I think that when impact investments become just normal investments, that's when we'll see the real change. However, there's so much money out there that everybody's just fighting for the same cases. Very, very rarely do we, and I'm bringing the pipeline back in the game here, but do we actually, is there something completely new? You've heard about it, you've seen it, you've met it, you've seen. So what we do is we proactively look. I mean, we just AI machine go in and look for deals, and we find them everywhere, but this is just our strategy. We think that shopping in your backyard is actually easier and the more likelihood of success if you do that. But the backyard to us is not just Denmark or even the Nordics. But we don't, I don't feel very comfortable. And in fact, I've lived many years in developing countries to make investments there, because you just don't know. Don't know the local stuff. So I think if you want to have success, and that's certainly our goal, you want to at least know where you're operating.
We had Danske Bank presenting their impact report, where you could tell that, for example, Sweden did an amazing job when it came to impact investments. Do you see any other countries or any other places around the world where, what are they doing, and could we copy what they're doing? People often talk about UK, people often talk about Sweden. I mean, startups that I've seen in my co-working spaces often skip to establish themselves in Denmark and then just immediately go for either a UK or a US establishment, right? Because then they're kind of ready for international investments, and also skip a couple of the tax issues.
I think go.
There's a lot of focus on certainly in the media, in the Danish media. The Danish companies staying here. It's a focus area for Vex Fund as well. We need to keep the jobs here. If you're a founder, you do what's best for your company. If you're an investor, you do what's best for your return. So it's just how it is. But you could have a fundamental belief that it's better to keep the companies here. And actually, I think there's so much focus on it. I'm not going to personally solve it, but I think it will be solved. So we should perhaps give better conditions. I thought it was mentioned at another panel that I was listening to, give better conditions to startups, understand the 5-year gap they have in New Zealand and stuff, where you just sort of encourage more. But I think we are doing a lot. I'm sure we could do better and do more, but...
I was just going to add that I think when companies move abroad very early stage, it's not just that it's not the optimal place right now, but they're already thinking a few years in the future. And I think for that topic, it's important also making sure that Europe as a whole, not just Nordics, has a well-functioning funding value chain, not just pre-seed, seed A, but also the later stages of venture, where we see American, big VC, big capital being super strong, as well as Asia, many markets as well. So I think many companies are, doing the backward math and thinking, if I flip now to Delaware Corp, that will improve my funding journey 2 years from now. So I think what we can do as a European Union in impact tech is making sure that the Green Deal becomes successful, by making sure that these sources of funding coming from the top go out all the way to the early stage, and of course the later stages as well. And there I think there's maybe a funding gap at the very late stages as well, that influences the early stage to keep the job creation here in the Nordics and in Europe.
Yeah, definitely.
I think there are multiple ways of incentivize more capital to flow towards early stage ventures, and then that being funding, for instance, locked up on our individual bank accounts, our private savings, our pension funds, and so forth. So I think there's an opportunity to do that. But I would also venture to say, as it was said here, that there are capital available. So it also becomes a matter of how do you deploy that in a way that's most catalytic, or where you can have the biggest possible impact. And then impact is defined differently. If you're a government, you talk about job creation and taxes and wealth creation, that's very local. So that's the incentive for you, but that might not be what the founder has in mind, or what's needed in the short term to build a company. So I think we need to get a little bit away from this notion that it's all about kind of optimizing for the local. We should talk about how do we expand the pie? How do we help the founders and the ventures that can have an impact? How do we help them scale using capital, technology, infrastructure that's available? And I think in Denmark, the Innovation Foundation, Vex Fund, the ecosystem is quite rich for the early stage and where you're pre-seed. But then often you fall into kind of this valley of death, right, between angels and then maybe your Series A, and that's an opportunity space. That's a place where we could do more locally, I feel. But that said, I think I would really like to get away from this talk about local job creation only as a proxy for whether you're successful or not.
And what criteria would you then put up instead?
In my case, it would be
What
impact,
criteria?
right? So you would look at, as an impact investor, you would look at 3 bottom lines. Right? So what's your social contribution, your environmental contribution, and of course your economic contribution. And they all have to kind of balance. So you shouldn't be concessionary necessarily on your returns as an investor, but you should be mindful also, are you driving the right outcomes in terms of social or environmental positive impact, or decreasing the negative impacts.
So for example, every single startup that I know who fundraised in 2020 obviously geared up with Vex Fund and their matching loans ×3. It ends shortly. It's been extended, and then it's been extended, and then it's been extended again. But for example, if we were to make that a permanent system, should it then, and this is a little bit also on a value side, should it then be able to give preference? So, okay, matching ×2, but ×3 if it was impact in one way or the other, or if the founding team was diverse, right, to kind of create and incentivize for more of that. Like, some people hate it, some people love it. Where do you guys stand?
Yeah, so it's a lot of talks with the Vex Fund. You are starting here, and I think the Vex Fund is a banking business that wish to actually live on the loans they are making, of course. And in that perspective, they are very concerned about these multipliers you're talking about, because they make money when it's one-to-one, and when it's more, it's very hard to make money because you are very fast in depth. And for these companies to be in that amount of depth is very hard for the models Vex Fund is working with. So it's very hard to work with the Vex Fund when we have these kinds of depth so early in the company's life. So of course it would help. I think there's a lot of business angels that have been thriving on these loans, these COVID loans. But I think the incentives should more be in the direction of interest rate and the scope of the investments in time instead of the multiplier. I think it's very important to have the investors on board with significant equity.
I think, personally, I think the Vex Fund, and we've been privileged to have it in this period of time. And I think they've really stepped up and done an excellent job. But that's not to say that we should just continue that out. I think that was what was needed during COVID crisis. I think we need to get back to more kind of more normal market terms. Also to give room for others than Vex Fund, because they've really they've held their hand under a lot. And I think there they play a new role, potentially asking different types of investor questions to those that are going to get funding. And that could be questions around, what's your carbon footprint? What does the diversity look like on the founder team, and so forth. And I think that's on us as investors to start having different conversations, also about what constitutes value. And there's a lot to do still there, also in Danban. So I think we need to start educating ourselves and just be mindful of our own biases and start maybe pushing for a little bit of a different conversation that's not always about optimizing your return.
But
that's just my opinion.
A lot of things going on in Vex Fund in this space. So, they are very aware
And
of
Louise sits on the board of Vex Fund, so her word has a
So-
little bit more.
So, but I'm not at the operational team.
No.
So, but there's a lot of conversation about this going on, and I'd rather actually talk about another private equity fund that I know that they have done what we talked about as well, to say, okay, if you put the targets in the front and say, well, your solution should reduce CO2 by so much, then you get a better interest rate, for instance. I think those are some of the models we're seeing, particularly in Sweden, and I think those, they work really well. And I think the whole sustainable finance space is where we should look at closely. And I know for a fact that is being taken good care of at Vex Fund. I've seen another very big Danish holding structure that are doing a lot of investments. Nobody mentioned, and they do it in every investment strategy that they implement, where they even from venture to big global equity investments, or even when they buy big companies, they have this process where they put these goals in. So I think there's a lot going on, but we haven't seen the result of it yet because it's just being implemented now. So this sustainable finance, but also sort of measuring other things, is so new. I mean, we all work in it every day, but to convince your investment team and implement it, create it, implement it, see the result, it'll take a while, and we have to have patience. People are doing things out there.
That's fair.
Yeah, and
Just shortly, because we have a question from the audience afterwards, but please.
yeah, so I also think we need to talk about the Vex Fund's loan in another way, because one thing is like matching an equity, but I wish the Vex Fund had some other ideas about what loans could be. There are some loans that could be marked as, I don't know what the English term is, but likviditetsforskydelse, where you loan money to actually make a production of something that have another risk to it than the normal burn that you give to startups. I mean, in the scaling industry or the scaling stage, it's very important for a lot of companies to have this working capital that is actually not that risky as burn capital. And to see the difference between these two are very important for making the right deals as an angel, but also as Vex Fund and banks especially.
But Vex Fund is looking at that already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So that's all part of the process.
Great. You had a question.
Yeah, it was just regarding you asked how we could be inspired by other countries out in the world, and I think there is a pretty interesting message, at least behind what they do in Chile, because they just made it illegal for Kinder, Kellogg's, and Nestle, I think, to sell products, just because they could basically see that this is about like social sustainability, that they could see that people died from it and became ill, and I don't know.
So just repeat, illegal to sell.
Kellogg's, Nestle, and Kinder. And yeah, now we talk a lot about, everybody has read Jytte from marketing, and that's the behavioral design principles behind it, because when you take away one product from the shelves, then people will go to another product. So maybe we should make it harder actually to do, we should give people an incentive to take the right actions by removing the wrong things. But I just doubt that we have the courage to do that in the Western world or in the modern countries.
I love that. I think it's the first time throughout today that I've heard anyone mentioning the stick approach. So a bit like Norway, right?
Yeah.
Double up the prices and hopefully fewer people will smoke, or
yeah, that's
along
basically
those lines.
how like, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss, at least, because we tend to, at least in Denmark, talk a lot about it, and then we talk for that long, and we want everybody to agree on it, and sometimes the matter of fact is just that the human brain wants to what to say, we used our senses and our feelings to say or to determine our actions, and then we put the logic on to actually tell us why we do that. So yeah,
Cool.
That was a bit unclear, the last part. So
But-
we
but
make a
what I'm gonna
decision
do
with our
is-
feelings, and then we use our logic to say why that action was the right one. So we need to question
Yeah, our
ourselves
actions
as human
confirm
individuals.
our own bias.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because it's just if the cake is on the table, like, it's just a matter of time before you will take a piece of the cake when it's on the table, right?
I will take the cake on the table for sure.
But I think the notion of time, I think, is an important one, and I also appreciate, that we need to learn and we need to take steps and so forth. But if we talk about, some of the challenges that we're facing, we don't have time. And I think that's where we need to, we really need to be intentional about what we're trying to achieve here. And I think that goes to us as investors also. We need to have a bit more, lack of a better word, a bit more activistic approach. We need to challenge ourselves in how we go to market, the signals that we send, the type of, deals that we're trying to attract, and how we work with them. And not just look at kind of, classic returns or others. And I think that if we do that, that's going to drive change. And then personally, I believe the market will then kind of sort out the rest. But I think the onus is on us as investors to start talking a little bit differently about these things.
Do it as part of your sum up, because time is flying, and I think another point was also the risk, right? Are we willing to take that risk and go all in and actually say, this is what we want to be best at? We've seen examples of what could the private contribute with change of convictions and behavior, but also a bit of public initiatives. And just a quick round here at the end. We have 10 strength positions across Denmark, but now we're talking impact technologies and sector focus. What would you recommend that we focus all our efforts upon? Just super quickly. What do you personally, you organization, up to you, believe in the most on the behalf of Denmark?
I mean, personally, I would kind of put all my bets on SDG 17, so partnerships, and that's about trying to find each other around private,
But
public.
you're actually saying 17. So if you were to choose one of those 17 on behalf of our country, which one do you think that we are mostly suited for?
I don't like the proxy of that, because I think, of course you need to understand they're also all interlinked, right?
Yes.
But we have a strength around green. I think that there's something that we can build on. There's shoulders we can stand on in terms of, renewables, and the infrastructure around that, including existing companies, larger companies, Ørsted, Vestas, and so forth.
So
I think
infrastructure and renewables. And Louise.
So I have to focus on something. We're already focusing food and ag, EdTech, energy innovations. We already have our focus areas. I think it's super important, and my anecdote was 4 years ago when we launched, I went to Folkemøde, And, I was this odd one out speaking. I mean, I was this weirdo. And I was next to all the Danish banks and ATP, and we were on a panel. And they was just like, ooh. And I'm just telling because it's the truth. And 2 years later, we were on the same panel, but now we're pals. So I think that the deal is that I haven't even moved a centimeter, in my view, on what is important, where capital needs to go. Because there is a sense of urgency that, the planet is burning. But we don't get anywhere if we scream at them. We need to get the big traditional institutions to look our way. And they're coming, they're moving, but they're big machines. They have a lot of old people at the top that need to change their thinking or move on. And I didn't say amen, but you said it.
I said it.
Yeah. And we need that generation to actually move on or come with us.
Yeah.
Because of course we need to impact invest, but we're not getting there by shouting. We're just getting there by moving slowly in the right direction, and it is moving in the right direction.
And if you are to advise them, where should they look, right? Impact can also be a little bit overwhelming. What would you recommend them to, as a new impact investor on the scene, where should they start to focus?
Well, if they're
where
running
do you see the greatest potential?
If they're running big Danish financial institutions, they should have the brain to find out where they should focus, but they should focus on all their clients and the companies that they're working on and understand. And actually, I know there are things going on because in the agricultural space, there are some banks that are very good at saying you only get this if your solution for the agriculture will change the way it affects the climate, etc. So it is going on, but it needs to go on across the board. So green loans, those sort of solutions that bank can offer is where we need to go.
Thank you. Mikkel?
Yeah. So it's a hard question.
I know.
And I say this not as a Danban, but as personal, what I wish we could do more of, and that would be recycling. Yeah. I think we are in a spot as Denmark where we could be the world leader in this if we wish to be, and we could make a lot of money to be that leader in the recycling business. But it would need the government to take action because recycling is a very hard business to be in right now. And we need to have technologies developed, more technologies. I know there are technologies developed, but we need much more technology in this sector. And we could get some answers about changing materials when we knew more about the recycling sector, as we don't have today the answers. So I wished the recycling sector, yes.
Yes.
Great. I think lastly, a strong green ecosystem must stand on the shoulders of decades of experience and expertise to build great companies. And looking at where Denmark is strong since decades, looking at shipping with Maersk, of course, in the backbone, and shipping being 4 or 5% of overall emissions, it's huge numbers. Looking at biotechnology and biodiversity, you have strong Danish players there as well, with expertise and research behind it, shifting that expertise even more towards green. And of course, energy, as been mentioned as well, with Vestas and Ørsted and strong Danish corporations since decades and more, and shifting that even faster, and the talent base to form new companies based on what they've learned, in the same way as Sweden has a heritage of telecom, finance, media, and so forth, that is now giving rise to a new wave of companies. But I think Denmark has the cornerstones of building the best green ecosystem in the world, and I think on the road to doing that, and we all can play a vital role to make that happen.
Thank you.